Good morning.
Good morning.
Can go back to saying good morning now that it's not Wednesday. For you all that were here on Wednesday, this is the third class in a row that you get to hear me, so good for you. We are going to go back to talking about the judges after we talked about knowledge on Wednesday. Resume our study of the judges today. Before we start, I've asked Kevin if he would to lead us in prayer.
Our most gracious, loving God and Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day and all the blessings that you give us. We're so thankful, Father, that as children of thine, we can come together and present ourselves in worship. As we come to this period of Bible study, Father, may we open our hearts and our minds to thy truth, that we will take the things that Andrew teaches us and apply them to our lives. As we go out into the world, we can be the example unto them, a light in a world of darkness that we need to be. Watch over us, Father. Be with all of our number who are not able to be with us today. Go with us now through this and then our period of worship service to follow, and on through the rest of our lives. And if we are found faithful in the end, grant unto us that which you've promised, a home in heaven with thee. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. Before we start, does anyone need any questions for the class today? Hi. Anyone else need one? Thank you. All right, so we've been talking about the judges since back in April. So as we start with every class, just to kind of remember the setup for these classes. When we talk about the judges, we always talk about the cycle of the judges, and this happens throughout the time of the judges that we read about. It always starts out with the Israelites forsaking God and turning to idolatry. And so then God allows their enemies to defeat them as punishment. Then the people cry out to God for help in their distress. God then has mercy on them and sends a judge who delivers them from their oppressors. And then the land is at peace for the rest of that judge's life. And then the cycle starts over again. And this happens over and over throughout the judges that we read about. And then the keynote verse that kind of describes this time period. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. So up to this point, we've talked about 13 of the 15 judges. And so I just wanted to, again, just do a quick recap to remember the judges that we've talked about so far. So the first judge, way back in April, that we talked about was Othniel. And who was the notable relative of Othniel? Caleb, yes. So he was Caleb's nephew, originally then turned into son-in-law. We talked about that way back when. And he was the first judge of Israel, defeated the king of Canaan. The second judge we talked about was Ehud. What was something notable about him? Yes. The only specific person described as being left-handed in the Bible. And that allowed him to sneak in a dagger to the Moabite king's palace and stab the king and kill him. So that was an interesting story way back in April again. The third judge we talked about was Shamgar. What was it that he did that was notable? Yes. He had flashes of Samson, 600 Philistines that he killed with an ox goad, and there's only one verse written about him. So he was the third judge. The fourth judge we talked about was Deborah. What was unique about Deborah? The only female judge. She was a prophetess, and so she was the one that she called Barak to lead the Israelites into battle against Jabin, the king, and Sisera, the commander. The fifth judge we talked about was Gideon. What was notable about Gideon?
He was kind of a nobody, and great success by the power of God, defeated that just massive army of 300 people.
One of the, maybe the most notable of the judges that we read about, he starts out from, considers himself to be the least in his family and the least in his tribe and all that, and ends up being the deliverer of Israel. And just you see the faithfulness of Gideon and his 300 men to be willing to go into an army going into the battle against an army that was 450 times larger than them, but God gave them the victory. Then the next judge after that was Abimelech. What was notable about Abimelech?
He was a usurper.
He was not much like his father, was he? He was the son of Gideon, but he kind of made himself king when it was not his place to do so. Conspired with the people of Shechem to become king, and he had all his brothers killed. But it didn't end well for him, as was prophesied by Jotham, his only brother that had escaped being killed. He ended up being turned on by the men of Shechem, and then ultimately died by having a large stone dropped on his head. And so that was the way that he went out. Then we talked about Tola. What was notable about Tola? Nothing. So we talked about this, one of those minor judges. Not much happens with a few of these judges. He was judge for 23 years. Jair was judge for 22 years. Had a lot of sons with a lot of cities. Jephthah, finally we have another judge that was more said about. What was the thing that stood out about Jephthah? Yes, Jephthah was a valiant warrior and led the Israelites to victory over Ammon, but unfortunately he made that foolish vow that he was going to make an offering of the first thing that came out to meet him when he returned to his house. And who did that end up being? Yes, his only daughter. So we learned the lesson there, to be careful with what vows we make, or more specifically, don't make vows. Then Ibzan, what's the notable thing about Ibzan? Nothing. He's not much said about him. He is from Bethlehem. He was a judge for 7 years. Another one was Elon that we talked about. Not really anything notable about him, but he was judge for 10 years. And then last of the minor judges, Abdon, he was the one that had a lot of sons and grandsons. I think that was another one of the ones that they rode on a lot of donkeys for some reason. And was judge for 8 years. And then the last judge that we talked about, the 13th judge, was Samson. What do we remember that was notable about Samson? Mm-hmm. So he was a Nazarite from birth, and God gave him this extraordinary strength that caused him to do some of these impressive feats. One of them being that he killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey, which is hard to imagine, but some of the amazing things that God allowed him to accomplish. But what was the weakness that Samson had? Yes, and specifically Philistine women that were the enemies of Israel, and that ultimately caused his demise because he eventually gave out his secret to his strength to the Philistine woman Delilah, and who then cut his hair and caused his strength to be lost, and so the Philistines were able to capture him. Then what was the one final great act that Samson was able to accomplish? Yes, so his hair started to grow back, and then he was in that Philistine temple with all the major people of the Philistines there, and then so he prayed one last time for God to give him strength, and he was able to push the pillars of the temple in and kill more Philistines there at his death than he had done in his life up to that point. And so we talked about, God accomplishing his purpose through Samson that he wanted to do. It just Samson made it harder on himself than he needed to. So at this point, we have actually moved out of the book of Judges, because we've covered all that's in the actual book of Judges. After we talked about Samson, we talked about some of those other stories that are there at the end of the book of Judges, Micah and his idols, and then the civil war between the tribes that causes Benjamin to get wiped out. And then the last couple of weeks we talked about Ruth, because Ruth also happens during the time of the Judges. A great example of someone who was not an Israelite, but that we see the faithfulness and the loyalty that she had with her mother-in-law there. But now we've moved past all of that, and we're ready to get back into the actual last two judges left. We'll talk about Eli and Samuel. Bill?
Yeah, I'm doing a little research and commentary on the book of Ruth this past week, and bring a little more clarity perhaps to what the times were like during this judges period, which Ruth lived during this period of time. Your statement that you make up there, people did as they saw fit in their own eyes, and they equated that to a couple of incidences in the story of Ruth, in that when Ruth went to glean the fields, Boaz told his male servants to leave her alone. And later on, when she went to approach Boaz in the evening, the commentary was saying how dangerous this was, because number one, she was a Moabite. Number two, she was a woman going out at night, and this is why Boaz said to her, stay here until the morning and then leave, because the times were so turbulent that she could have been attacked and raped or whatever during that period of time. So it kind of add a little more clarity to this. People did as they saw in their own eyes, how turbulent the times were.
Yeah, that would have definitely been a risk of her being out that late. And it's, we see that, of course, in the story that we talked about at the end of Judges, what happened to, the concubine of the man that went to Gibeah there. So, there was a lot of chaos happening in this time of the Judges, because people weren't following God's ways a lot of the time. And so that's part, one of the main themes we see throughout the book of Judges, is that people doing, what they think is right in their own eyes, and not what God says is right. But all this, you have the cycles where sometimes they're more following God, and other times not as much. So we have gotten through Judges and through Ruth, and so we're going to turn over now into 1 Samuel to get our last two judges, and this will be on the page of questions I gave out 2 weeks ago, I think. So let's talk about our 14th judge. What is the name of the 14th judge? His name is Eli. We read about him in the first 4 chapters of the book of 1 Samuel. What tribe is Eli from? Yes, how do we know that he is from the tribe of Levi? Yes. So all of the priests were from the tribe of Levi, and specifically, who were they descended from? Aaron. Right. So we know for Eli to have been the priest, he had to have been from the tribe of Levi and from the lineage of Aaron. In this time period, we'll see that there'll be, again, the Philistines, one of probably the most common of the enemies of the Israelites. And then we see that he judged for 40 years. Now, the interesting thing with Eli is that we actually, to start into learning about Eli, we actually start out by looking at the next judge after Eli, and we look at how Samuel starts. So there's a little bit of overlap, and that's why on the page I gave out, you see it says like Eli/Samuel. And then eventually we'll get to Samuel on his own once Eli exits the picture. So let's get into our questions. So then looking at 1 Samuel chapter 1 and question 1 on the page of questions, describe the family situation of Elkanah.
He had 2 wives. One had children, and the one that we read more about, Hannah, she had no children.
Yes.
The other wife cause there to be distress on the children.
Yes, so this is another example that you see from the Old Testament where you have a man that has multiple wives. He has the one wife Hannah and the other wife Peninnah. I know it's a hard one to say. So he has these two wives. This is a good point to take a minute and step back and look at it. Are there any examples in the Bible where someone has more than one wife that it's the perfect setup and everything goes smoothly and there's never any problems? I don't think I could think of any ones that had any.
Well, this story is similar to Jacob with Leah and Rachel.
Very true. Think about, we know that Jacob obviously was faithful, that he was, one of the patriarchs from the Old Testament.
He loved Rachel more, just the same as this man pretty well displays that he loves Hannah more than, I can't
Yeah.
say her name.
Yeah, the other one. Yeah. So we know that Jacob was obviously faithful, but would you say that his family was free of any conflict or commotion or tumult? I think his family had one of the more, some of the most upheaval that you see of any family in the Bible. And a large part it was because of that, having the multiple wives there that caused all this commotion. Some others that you think about with multiple wives, think about David. How did it go for David with his multiple wives?
Not good.
Does his family have any trouble?
Nothing but.
No, nothing too big other than that his son trying to take his kingdom away and have him killed, and all the other issues that happened with one of his sons killing another son and all that stuff. So another example that if you see that not going well, and then another one you could think about would be Solomon, that his multiple wives cause any problems. You could say it caused pretty much all his problems, right? If he multiple as in hundreds. We see that ends up being his main issue. What we would consider to be, the wisest man besides Jesus, maybe to ever live, and having all these wives caused him all these problems. So, just wanted to mention that here, that sometimes people can get tripped up by that. That just because that's mentioned here doesn't mean that this is God, giving approval to the situation. We know what was the when creation happened, what was God's design for the family?
To make one woman for one man.
Right. He didn't create Eve and other women as well for Adam. That was all that Adam needed was just Eve. So remember, this is still that time period of the judges. People are doing what's right in their own eyes. And you have some things in the Old Testament that are different than the way things are now. Kevin?
The only thing I will say about that, I don't think that God approved of that, but He allowed it.
Mm-hmm.
And He allowed it as long as you were responsible for those wives.
Yes.
In other words, you couldn't go and get another wife and then get rid of your first wife.
Mm-hmm.
You were responsible for taking care of all of them.
Yes.
I don't like it, I'll allow you to do it, doesn't mean that it's right. But you are responsible, and that's where
Yes.
a lot of people don't understand, and they say, well, it should be okay, God, but no, it's because you absolve yourself of one and then cling to the other. And
Yes.
before long, you may absolve yourself of that one and cling to another. That's not God's way.
Yeah, so we see that God kind of put up with things a little bit during the time of the Old Testament, that when the more perfect New Testament came, some of those things that he put up with for a time were no longer allowed. It reminds me of when I forget if it's the Philistines or the Sadducees were asking about asking about divorce, and Jesus talking about, that God, allowed them for a time, like he put up with it for a time during the time of Moses because of the hardness of their hearts. But, from the beginning, it wasn't that way. So you could say the same thing here with the setup. I just wanted to mention that here, that just because that's mentioned here of them having 2 wives doesn't mean that that was what God wanted. So you have this man that has these 2 wives, and one of the wives has the favor with her husband but no children, and the other wife has all the children and not the favor, which is similar to what happens with Jacob's family, that Leah had all the children, and Rachel didn't originally, but Jacob was more favoring her, and that caused a lot of the problems in their family. And so I think that factors into it here, that because Hannah has because she is getting more favor from her husband, that's probably part of why the other wife gives her a hard time about having no children. And so this, it says that, let's see, go down to, in verse 6, it says that Hannah's rival would provoke her bitterly to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. It happened year after year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she would provoke her, so she wept and would not eat. So this situation is causing Hannah a lot of problems, and so we'll see in the next question what she's going to do about that. Anything else on question 1? Okay. Question 2, what action did Hannah take at Shiloh?
She went to the tabernacle and she named an ambush with her, but she didn't have a child. She wanted a son.
Yeah, so we see that they go up again for the sacrifices to be made, and they have their feast there, and she leaves the feast, and it says that she goes to the tabernacle, and it says she, in verse 10, she greatly distressed, prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And so what was the vow that she makes in verse 11?
That if she would give her a son, she dedicated him his whole life to the Lord.
Yes, so it says in verse 11 that she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and a razor shall never come on his head. So we looked at this verse back when we were talking about Samson, and what is it, this razor never coming on his head, what is it that is a trait of? Yeah, so that's one of the things that a Nazirite would do. They would not cut their hair during the time of their Nazirite vow. So it never says specifically that Samuel was a Nazirite, but you can see signs here that he may have been that way. But we always think about Samson with his long hair because he was a Nazirite. But it appears Samuel was the same way, that he would have had that. He never had his hair cut during his life. So I think that's interesting. But you see here that this, the special purpose that Samuel is being appointed for, that he would be dedicated, to the Lord all the days of his life. Think about what a sacrifice this is on Hannah's part. That this kind of makes you think back to what was it that when the Israelites were to make an offering to God, what was it that they were supposed to give it from?
First fruits.
Yes, they weren't to give just what was left over after they had, had everything they wanted, and then it's like, okay, this is stuff we don't need, we'll give that. It was the first fruits, right?
That's the problem later on, of Malachi, whatever, they get the word, they are giving the voice.
Yes.
Everything is the voice of God.
And was God pleased with that? He said, if they're going to do that, then just don't give, don't make the offering at all. If they're going to give, what's left over, what's the worst.
It's like
Like,
it was robbing God.
yeah, because God was, he wanted the first fruits from them, and because the people in the time of Malachi weren't giving those to God, then he said they were robbing him. But yeah, so the Israelites were to give of their first fruits, and so I think you really see that here with Hannah, that this is her giving of her first fruits. Like, this is a great sacrifice, because if What if she has Samuel but then never has any more children? She would be giving up the only child she ever had. But shows how impressive this vow is that Hannah's willing to make here. That she would, that if God would, help her in this situation and give her a son, that she would be willing, that she would give him up to be dedicated to God all the days of his life. Yes.
In that, sometimes we overlook that fact when she, like you said, she is willing to give this child up.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of overlook, perhaps sometimes the purpose.
Yeah.
The purpose of her wanting a child is because she didn't have any.
Yeah.
Her rival had children.
Mhm.
But the purpose is that was just one of the things that a woman was judged by back then.
Yes.
And she wanted a child, just to have a child.
Right.
And was willing to dedicate this child to the Lord, just the same as when we had children. We should be willing to dedicate ourselves to teaching them the way of the Lord.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. That if you have children, to think about it that way. That you could dedicate them to the Lord. Not the way that Hannah did, as far as that you would take your child to the temple and never cut their hair and things like that. But you should. It's a worthy thing for a parent to to dedicate your child to the Lord, to do everything in your power to teach them the ways of God, to train them up in the way that they should be. Anything else on question 2? Yes.
Actually, that should be the first thing we do before we have a child,
Right.
is that families often talk about the fact that they want a baby, and that they're going to give that child, not, as you said, not like Hannah did, but I'm going to give my children to the Lord.
Yeah.
The good question for all of us as parents, how have we lived up to that? Have we really, did we really give our children to the Lord? And what Kevin said about that, we feel obligated so to bring them up in the virtue and the admonition of the Lord. We're not responsible for the child's response later on, but we are responsible as parents to give them to the Lord.
Right.
And that seems to be something we do not, and for some reason, it seems like we're afraid to talk about it.
Right.
Giving our children to the Lord. It is a blessing. It turned out being a blessing for Hannah.
Yeah.
And I think as a whole, if we give our children to the Lord, not just when they're younger, but also speak with them as they're older. When it comes to grandchildren, same thing. Sometimes as grandparents, we're not as strict on the grandchildren as we are on the children. So
Yeah.
maybe that we need to speak out in other situations as well. Say, I gave you to the Lord, now why haven't you given your child to the Lord as well?
Yeah.
All that can be said in the right way.
Yeah, so that's where Hannah's a good example that it's even before you have a child, that you want to come into it from that perspective, that your main goal would be to raise them up, to train them up to be followers of God. It's not something that you wait until you've had a child and a few years into it. It's like, okay, now I'm going to start looking at that. It's you want to start out making that your main goal, because it's not going to happen by accident. It's going to take a lot of effort for that, to make that happen. Anything else on question 2? Okay. Question 3. This is in verses 12 through 18. What did Eli think that Hannah had done as she's there making her prayer? Yes. So it says that Hannah was praying but was not speaking, that she was just speaking in her heart. And so this is one, I think we all know this, but do prayers have to be said verbally? No, this is an example that
She just
Um,
moved her lips.
it's about praying with the heart, so you don't have to have, you don't have to have words speaking it out of your mouth for it to be a prayer. You can just make a prayer in your heart like Hannah did here. But Eli is there watching her and just sees her moving her lips but not saying anything. And so because of that, he thinks that she's drunk. And so he says to her in verse 14, "How long will you make yourself drunk? Put away your wine from you." But then Hannah explains there in verse 15 what it is that she's doing. She says, "No, my Lord, I am a woman oppressed in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul for the Lord." Verse 16, she says, "Do not consider your maidservant as a worthless woman, for I have spoken until now out of my great concern and provocation." And so then, what does Eli respond to her?
Go in peace. May God grant your petition.
Yeah, so I think she doesn't mention there specifically what she's praying about. It just says that she's distressed. And so Eli, he tells her to go in peace and says, "May God grant you your petition." And so the second part of the question, was Hannah encouraged after her conversation with Eli? Yes, so it says, she says, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So I think from that we can see example of her faith and trust in God, that she made her request to God, and she has faith that God's going to take care of it. And so we see that she goes away encouraged from her vow that she's made here. So I think that's a good one that we should recognize too, is that when we have a request for God, we should have that confidence that God's going to help us with it, that we shouldn't be worried and concerned, distressed about something, pray to God about it, and then be as worried and distressed and stressed about it as we were before. That we should get comfort from the fact that God, that we've made our request to God and have the trust that God's going to help us. Kevin, and then John.
I was going to say, herein though, the priest's job was to be the mediator between God and man.
True.
At that time. Now, our set of circumstances are different because we have Christ, the eternal high priest, to mediate between us and God. It seems like at this time, she's caught the attention of not only a priest, but the high priest.
Right.
And he says, God, go in peace, may God grant you what you've asked for. So now suddenly she feels, okay, I have mediation between me and God. Not only is he listening to my prayer, but I'm also telling it to the priest. Whether she told him everything or not, we don't know. But
Yeah.
he gives the idea that on her behalf, he will, make, I can't remember. what the word I'm
Intercession
trying to say,
for her?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one you can think about. Do we have a better mediator for us today than Eli the priest? Sure do. So should we have confidence when we make our requests and pray to God that God is going to do what's best for us? We should. And we see that Hannah did that here. John?
John, I just was thinking, Hannah was greatly distressed and troubled, and she prayed to God, and the priest then, as we just discussed, said, "Go in peace, and may God grant your petition." And notice what she did. She went and her face was no longer sad. I think
Yeah.
she's illustrating the lesson we just learned this morning.
Right.
That, like, he didn't say these words, but be still, go in peace.
Yeah. And that's the confidence and faith and trust in God is what can give you that peace that, her situation hasn't changed yet, but she's made her, request made known to God, and she's got that confidence that God's going to help her out. And so now that changes her, that she's now in a, feeling more positive about things, and she's able to no longer be sad and go and eat and all that. Dad?
Well, I was just thinking about how the sight of a woman praying at the tabernacle apparently was so uncommon.
True.
That Eli thought she was drunk.
Yeah.
Kind of a sign of the times there that apparently this was not something that he saw every day.
Yeah, that is true. That seemed to be unusual to him. This is kind of jumping ahead a bit, but when we get down into chapter 3, we get a look into how things were with the spiritual state of the time. In chapter 3, it says that that revelations from God were rare in these times. So you kind of get the idea that their spiritual state of the nation at this time is kind of not doing too well. So that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that, but he does seem to be surprised to see her there, and he just I guess it's so unusual that he thinks that she's just drunk. But see that he's impressed then to see that she's genuine in her request here.
Well, and he probably did see drunk people walking about in Shiloh, so.
Probably
he
so.
just equated what he saw to what he saw every other time.
Yeah. So I'm sure that stands out to him enough so that we'll see that he remembers her when she comes back later. Joe?
Yeah, your dad kind of hit on this that I was thinking about. It just kind of came to mind that and what Kevin said about Eli was the priest. You could almost say he was God's ambassador to the people, right?
Right.
We know that we're ambassadors for Christ today.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he made this assumption about what he was seeing.
Mhm.
And we can oftentimes make assumptions too about the things that we see. No matter how close we are to God, no matter where we're at, we got to be careful. And then we got to be willing to do like Eli did and say, go in peace and let me encourage people.
Right. Yeah, and so that's, in similar ways we can be impressed when we, because there's plenty of examples that we see in our society today of people that are not acting in a faithful way. And so when we do see someone that acts faithfully, it should be, it should stand out to us and be impressive. Yes.
I think it's hard sometimes to see, turn it over to God. And that's
Yeah.
really what Hannah is being told, turn it over to God, you know who will be okay.
Yeah.
Seems at times I want to try to help him. I want him to do it, even though I want God to take care of it, I want to do it my way. And going to what you did and say, morning, I need to learn to be still and wait on the Lord. And that's what Hannah did. And it said she was happy. And
Yeah.
whenever I do turn something over to the Lord, I'm a lot happier as a person because I put it in the hands of the greatest power anywhere. So all of us need to learn. Turn it over to the Lord. And it's not that you're going to forget that you did, but just got to wait on Him, and it will all turn out to be good.
Yes. Very true. And
We're given plenty of examples of not turning it over into the Lord and things turn out wrong.
Yeah.
I point to the first one that we can read about is Abraham.
mhm.
All you gotta do is wait, Abraham, I'm going to fulfill my promise. And
Yeah.
he didn't, and that caused problems.
Right. I was thinking about that too. That with Ishmael, that they had been promised that they would have a son, and so then years are passing and nothing's happening, and so then they have the idea to use their maid Hagar, and Hagar has a son, but that's God says this is not the son I promised to you, and yeah, that caused some issues in their family too. But we see with Hannah that once she's made her request to God, that she is confident in God and content with that, and so she goes her way happy. Question 4, what did God do for Hannah after these events? Yes. So God granted her request, and it says that she had a son and named him Samuel, saying, "Because I have asked him of the Lord." And so God has rewarded her faithfulness by giving her the request. And so then we see, does Hannah change her mind and say, well, now that I've actually got a son, I really want to keep him for myself. So, God can't take him back now, so now I've got my son, and now I can just do whatever I want with him. Well, we see that she immediately goes about fulfilling what her vow was. So, second part of the question, why did she not go back immediately at the next yearly sacrifice? She doesn't initially take Samuel there to the tabernacle, and what's the reason for that? Yeah, which makes sense. That she wouldn't, he would need to get to that point before she could turn him over, and so she doesn't go back initially at the first time that they go back up for the yearly sacrifice. Then question 5, once it was time for them, once Samuel was old enough to be able to go, what did Hannah bring with her once it was time to take Samuel to Shiloh?
She took her son, and she took, offered a 3-year-old bull. She went to the priest to carry out her vow.
Yeah, so she brings an offering to make with the bull and flour and wine, and goes there to the tabernacle there at Shiloh. And then so then she comes to Eli in verse 26. And so she tells Eli that she was the one that had come and prayed there at the tabernacle. And we see that Eli remembers that she had come. So again, kind of makes you think that it was kind of an unusual thing that Eli didn't see much. So the second part of that question, what would Samuel's purpose be as designated by his mother Hannah? So verses 27 and 28. Yeah.
The thing that you also need to take in mind is Samuel is going to be serving there at the tabernacle, but he can't be a priest. My understanding is they were from the hill country of Ephraim, so that therefore he was of the tribe of Ephraim. So he couldn't be a priest. All he could do was be a servant to these priests.
Right. But we see he's kind of got this unique position that he's been dedicated, to the service of the Lord, and we see, throughout his life that he follows up on that. But yeah, he couldn't be directly a priest since he's not a Levite, not of the lineage of Aaron. But that didn't mean that he couldn't, be. He could take part in the worship of God there and the service of God. Yeah, I guess he was. It doesn't say exactly how old he was, but he was, at least weaned to this point. It does say that he was still young. So it seems from pretty early on in his life that he's taken there for this purpose. But verse 27, Hannah says, "For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord." And then what's the response of Eli there?
Worship the Lord.
Yes, so this causes him to respond in worship. This is going to be a great benefit to Eli having Samuel there. So Samuel, this is the start that we see from Samuel, and so we're going to, for the next several chapters of 1 Samuel, we'll see the strong example that we see from Samuel and all the good things that he does in the service of God, all starting from this dedication of his mother right here. So thank you all for the comments. We will continue at chapter 2 next week. Still several more questions to go on this page. This goes through chapter 3, so probably another week or so on this page. So, thank you for the comments.